I want to introduce Michael Fantasso. In case you don't know him, he sings in the Chalice choir. He sings in the Chalice choir. He received his JD degree from George Washington University, and and he recently passed the California bar exam. So he's our expert on the law around here. So anyhow, he volunteered to interactively share his understanding of international laws relating to war and genocide. And he has strong viewpoints, and he is committed to speaking out on this issue. And
All right.
you want a mic?
Yeah, I don't think I really need a mic, do I? Or do you insist?
Yeah.
Insist? Okay. Hello. All right. I hope Grant is back, but in the meantime, he's back. Now I can tell. So thank you for coming to my teach-in. I want to definitely thank everyone who's supported me coming this way. I don't think I could have passed the bar without everyone's support as well, because I got a lot of support from a lot of people here at Chalice, so thank you so much. So thank you especially to Reverend Nika, because I brought up the teach-in, and I was like, I'll do it, but I think you were very much like, yeah, we can do that. So I was really excited, and I'm very honored to speak in front of you, and may it please the Chalice, my case of genocide, war crimes, and our obligations under international law. So, starting off, this is a picture of me marching with Marion Ingram. She is a Holocaust survivor. She was 89 at the time, and we were marching in D.C., back when I was living in D.C. And of course, there's Fry. We all know Fry. So, I want to start out by saying, or asking, what is a genocide? So, can we go to the next slide? Take a look at this picture, and I want to warn you, this is about as graphic as pictures I'm going to have. I'm not planning on showing a lot of blood and gore or anything like that. But there will be some descriptions of things that are, of course, very difficult to hear. So, somebody, do we want to do the microphones for people, or can you just call it out? What is a genocide? Give me some definitions. Anybody? Okay, we'll give the microphone. Maybe I'll walk up to you.
I'm going to say the killing of a people.
The killing of a people. Anyone else?
Yeah, I was going to say an effort to get rid of a whole group of people.
A whole group of people, to get rid of them. All right. And what does that mean, get rid of?
Kill them.
I just said a well-engineered campaign.
A well-engineered campaign. Well-engineered, that implies a certain intention, forethought. Very good, very smart crowd. Yes. And, a little note on this picture, of course, we think of genocide in sepia tones like it's a historical phenomenon, but then this is a picture taken in Gaza. Actually, it's in full color. This is a mass grave in front of a hospital. These are likely medical workers. So this was sort of a artistic license I took to make it more black and white on this side, but actually it's for modern times. But of course, we all think of the historical examples of genocides, such as, what do we think of? Call them out. Rwanda, I heard Rwanda. The Armenian genocides, that's considered the first genocide, are we aware? The genocide of the native peoples in America. Cambodia, all right. The Holocaust, of course, the Nazi Holocaust, as well as Sudan, what's happening in Sudan, also ongoing. Rwanda, thank you for bringing me back to Rwanda. So, next slide, please. Does anybody know what this is a picture of? A plane, but not an American plane. Well, I just mentioned Rwanda. So does anyone know why the Rwandan genocide, or what initially kicked off the Rwandan genocide? Between the Tutsis and the Hutus, the initial inciting event was that the president's plane, the president who was a Hutu, was shot down. It was shot down by armed forces blamed on the Tutsis. The Tutsis and the Hutus had been fighting, right? Some would say that they had been fighting for time immemorial. They'd been fighting for generations and generations. They had lots of tribal conflicts. And of course, with the Hutus and the Tutsis, the conflict was exacerbated by Western colonialism, correct? Because the Europeans came in and they favored the Tutsis over the Hutus and played them against each other, divide and conquer, colonialism. So it's the same themes, right, starting to approach themselves, as well as the idea here being that after the plane was shot down, the Tutsis were held collectively responsible and the Hutus went after them. Now, do we know that the Hutus had foreknowledge, though, right, in terms of committing the genocide? They didn't know the plane would be shot down, but how do we know that they were planning a genocide even before the plane was shot down? Do you have any ideas? It's because they were hiding weapons caches all over the machetes. So they had this in the works, and what they had was an inciting event that they could use as a pretext to pull off their genocide. So as lawyers, of course, we reason by analogy, oftentimes. That is very central to what we do. And of course, very central to what we do is we look at the definitions of words. So please, if you could put the next slide, I'm going to put up the definition of genocide under the Genocide Convention. So this is the Genocide Convention after 1948, and signatories include the United States and Israel. And we have 3 articles, and I'm going to focus on the second article, which defines genocide. And I want to first ask, well, actually, I'll read it out loud. Genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. All right. So I'll pause there, and I'll say, does anything jump out to you about that? Anything? Let me ask you this question. In all the news reports, perhaps in the American media that you've seen, where they talk about whether or not it's a genocide or they talk about this conflict, do they ever put that up and ask if it fits that definition? I'm seeing hands. No? No. So this, of course, would be the agreed upon definition in international law. Question? This is the origin. This is the Convention Against Genocide. So all the countries of the world after World War II came together and said, we are going to sign a convention that defines genocide and creates obligations for states to stop a genocide if it is happening and to not commit it, which of course is the international obligation, and it is the obligation, in fact, of we all have. So I want to point out a couple things here. The intent part, we talked about the intent. We've started to think about intent. What does intent sound like? For example, to commit a crime, you need usually 3 elements: the and the opportunity. What are the first two? Do we know? Motive. The intent is sort of like the motive, of course. The motive, in whole or in part. What do we think about that? Is that interesting to anybody? Why is that interesting? Call it out and I'll repeat it.
Well, because even if you take part in just a part of the subsequent things they've listed,
Yes.
then that is to be considered
Yes.
part of the definition.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even if you take only part. So let's just imagine for a second, thinking in terms of definitions. If we took out the in part and it was just in whole. Okay, imagine this. There's a group I don't like, religious group, say. I'm going to kill half of them because they are that religion. Is that a genocide? If I took out the in part, then it wouldn't be the whole group, so it wouldn't be a genocide, right? That's why you need the in part. Another important aspect of the in part is to say that, if I did set out to kill a whole group, but didn't completely kill all of them, then I could say, well, it wasn't a genocide, see, because there were survivors. I didn't get the whole group. So, of course, definitionally, you need in whole or in part. Another thing, they list 3 groups: four groups: national, ethnical, racial, or religious. Those are the 4. What do we think of that? Does that sound like a complete list? Is there anything else we can think about that you might consider like, what about if you killed this type of person? Anything missing? Sex, gender, very good. So sex and gender is not included, which is to say that perhaps the definition of genocide is somewhat under-inclusive, if anything. Another one that goes to when the definition was originally agreed upon by all the nations of the world, including the Soviet Union, and they strongly argued they did not want a certain type of group. Can we guess any type of group included? What am I doing? Wealth, economics. So if you kill all the rich people, it's not considered a genocide. Of course, it's not right. So it is confined to national, ethical, racial, or religious groups. And let's focus in on national. What is a nation? What is a nation? Anyone want to call it out?
Army and a navy and a flag.
A nation has an army, an navy, and a flag. Interesting, interesting. Okay, anyone else? What's that? A nation is a state. What do we think? Do we agree with that? No. Why don't you agree with that? There are lots of states in some nations. There are lots of nations in some states, right? So that's good. That's important to draw that distinction. So the classical international relations definition of a nation is called an imagined political community. An imagined political community. So say, for example, what is our nation, the American nation? What is that based on, supposedly? The philosophy of democracy, the Constitution, the Republic, the commitment to taking the oath to the Constitution we all share, not race. Yeah, a shared historical commitment, not just for white people. What about, for example, an ethno-state? If I put those two words together, ethno-state, what does that sound like? It favors one ethnic group. So in other words, a state in which it is defined, the nation is defined by the ethnicity or the religion. So, for example, if you might think of, is France an ethno-state? No, not really, because they're about liberté, fraternity, and égalité. There are people, of course, who are French people who can trace their, lineages all the way down in that same area. But of course, people who are born in France today, who are of African ancestry, are still considered French. Other countries, they do have a certain component of ethnicity governing that. China has actually many nations within China, right? Because it's the Han Chinese, but then they also talk about the 33 other groups within it. But of course, they do consider those one Chinese. And the point I just want to clarify is that a nation and a state are two different things. What is a state? What is a state under international law? Let's get to that in a little bit, because I have some on that. So we've honed in on any of this. Is this making sense so far? All right, seeing some nods, very good. So now we're going to talk about, and the number one thing is the as such. So remember when Gabor Mate was talking about October 7th, and he was talking about, were they attacking them as Jews as such? Or were they facilitating an attack on people and the people were Jewish, but the attack had overlapping or an overarching motive that isn't necessarily just to target them because of their Jewishness? So that's why it's very important to have the intent part. The intent part, I'll just tell you, is the hardest part of genocide to prove. Because you can prove all these actions, but the question is, well, why did they happen? And there'll be lots of defenses as to why they happened. So let's go over the 5. Actually, one second. So let's talk about how do you prove intent? How do you prove intent? Any ideas? We want to call it out? What's a good piece of evidence for intent? A plan. A written plan. Anybody else? Statements. Public statements by who? Fearless leaders? An organized group? Yes, fearless leaders, an organized group. Right. So you hit upon what I think is, the number one way to establish intent. Can I get the next slide? The statements of the leaders. Is that the next slide? That's not the next slide. Oh, you know what? Yeah, let's skip that. We'll skip that slide. The statements of the leaders. Very good. Thank you. So we have here in the middle of this graphic, Roz Siegel, Holocaust genocide historian, and he calls it a textbook case of genocide, what's happening in Gaza. Surrounding here, these are statements from the leadership of the Israeli government, very influential people, Benjamin Netanyahu, Yoav Gallant, and the statements they make that evince genocidal intent. And these are statements immediately after October 7th. As well as, I want to address what their defense often is, which is, well, we're just talking about Hamas. We're not talking about all Gazans. Well, take a look at this. Wipe out their families, their mothers, and their children. These animals must not be allowed to live any longer. Now there is only one goal, Nakba. So another point that people will make, and this is going to lead into some difficult territory, so I hope you'll stick with me, and I hope you'll have a little trust in me that I'm trying to lead you down a path here of reason. But how did these people get into power? Elected. Why do they think they can say this stuff out loud? So what Matthew Chapa said is a very hard truth. It reflects the people that elected them. And I really hate to do this. I really hate to show you this, but I think it's important because like the Rwandan genocide, this genocide has a democratic base. Can I get the next slide? So I could find clips of people saying crazy things, but then you might say, well, that's called nut picking. When you try to pick a nut to represent the whole group, like nitpicking, but with a nut. So that's why I try to focus on these polls. And these polls are consistent, persistent, and they replicate again and again and again. So the Israeli military response against Hamas has either been about right or not gone far enough. Next slide. From this one, 76% of the Jewish public say there's no innocence in Gaza. And of the opposition to Netanyahu, 47% say that, which is the plurality. Next slide. Here we have, to what extent should they take into consideration the suffering of the civilians? Not at all, not so much, about 73%. This is the Israeli Democracy Institute. Next slide. How concerned are you about reports of starvation amongst all Israelis, or specifically Jewish Israelis? These two are not concerned. This one is concerned, but only because it gets in the way of the war effort. And then this is the concerned because you shouldn't cause starvation. Next slide. And this is the rate of Jewish Israelis, and it's broken down by different sects. Supporting expulsion of Gaza residents, 70%, 90. Supporting the expulsion of Israeli Arabs, meaning the people who live in Israel, 38%, 65, 68, 91%. And next slide. And that number, actually, it's very interesting. This is, sorry, it's so hard to see. This is the Knesset's breakdown on certain Palestinian-related issues. We have expel Israeli Arabs, like I just mentioned, and it's gone from this to this. It's gone up. The Knesset has 120 seats, so we can see over 90 of them. This is 90, this is 120. Over 90 of them say, in the occupied territories, Palestinians have no rights. Voluntary transfer, quote unquote, of Palestinians to other countries. Next slide. And that's the issue we are dealing with, because we have to face this very unfortunate reality that there is a national consensus across the Israeli political spectrum that says opposition to the recognition of Palestinian statehood. And even if you were to get rid of Netanyahu, which of course I'd love to get rid of Netanyahu. Next slide. Removing Netanyahu might well help, but it's unlikely to fundamentally reorient Israeli policies towards the Palestinians. And another thing to note about Netanyahu is he is their number one most elected prime minister. And I know people make the argument, of course, well, we're not responsible, we're not, in the same way that the Trump government, what responsibility do we bear for that? And I think about that because it's an important point. And I think about how, well, Trump only once in one election got a majority of the votes of the people of this country. And so many of his policies are unpopular, especially having to do with this issue. And, but at the same time, as Americans, you know what? We do have responsibility for Trump and for his actions and for the government. And in a democracy, I would argue, you have more responsibility than in a dictatorship to influence the government, because you are actually able to do that. So if I could go to the next slide, and the final point I need to make on that point is, get rid of Netanyahu, the people waiting in the wings are even more right-wing. This is Ben Gvir, and here he is wearing a noose pin and handing out sweets to celebrate a law that was just passed to fast-track the execution of Palestinian detainees. So I'm sorry to have laid all this heavy stuff on you, but here we are. And if I could go to the one more slide. IDF whistleblower. This is a former IDF soldier who came forward and he said, the IDF really is fulfilling the public's wishes, which is that there are no innocents in Gaza. So does anybody have any thoughts, or would anybody, or should I keep going? Matthew.
So quick question, Michael. So thank you for all the data. It's very enlightening. I guess there was an earlier question, or not an earlier question, but a reflection on the future of all the children,
Yes.
all the Palestinian children that have watched all hell break loose, and the idea of revenge and anger.
Yeah.
Is there anything that shows what the Israeli people think is coming down the pike?
Interesting. I will. Yes, that goes to in terms of. Let me see if I have a specific. The terms of the justifications people will proffer for genocide, I would say. So I will get to that, and if I don't, make sure I do. But I would say to you that basically the attitude amongst the Israeli public is they've left us no choice. It's this or they're going to grow up and be terrorists. This is what we have to do. It's what has to be done. And the world's going to be against us on this, but we just need to do what we got to do. So is how I would distill it. And of course, if anybody wants to see my sources, if anybody wants these slides afterwards, if anybody wants to do their own research, of course, and tell me I'm wrong about anything, please let me know. I'd love to know. It's one of those things where I wish I'd love to be wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong. So, nice. So going back to the definition, I want to point out a couple other things. If you look at B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. Bodily or mental harm to members of the group. So that's interesting. As well as forcibly transferring children of the group to another group, imposing measures intended to prevent births. Those three kind of have something in common. Anybody kind of pick up on that? What's that? Abortion, sterilizations, yeah. Specifically, that could be how you prevent births. And I guess I shouldn't include that one, but in terms of these two, you don't actually have to kill anybody to commit a genocide. You can cause bodily or mental harm, serious bodily or mental harm, but technically not actually kill anybody, and it still could be a genocide. And of course, you can also do those things on top of everything else that you're doing, which is happening now. I have a clip for that, but how are we doing on time? What time is it? Is it 1:58? Okay. Do you want to play the clip, Grant? Grant's going to play a clip that I think demonstrates mental harm. So it's heartbreaking. It's to hear. And, we love to look at airplanes. And I remember that after 9/11, as a child seeing 9/11 on TV, I was thinking, what an awful thing to do with airplanes, So there's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of trauma going on. And of course, we ask ourselves, well, how would people grow up? I mean, if somebody killed my dog, I would do a lot. I think we can understand that. Well, which is to say, the mental harm factor is very important, and I just think it's interesting. You could technically commit a genocide without actually killing directly anybody. As well as the other definition of genocide, which is to inflict conditions of life. So could I see the next slide? Inflicting conditions of life. So this isn't causing a quote-unquote violent death, which would be, say, for example, shooting or collapsing a building or bombing somebody, of which it's currently calculated there have been 100,000 violent deaths in Gaza, counting so far and growing. And in any war, I don't know if we know this, but in any war, the majority of deaths typically are not usually from the battlefield. They are from disease. So here's an example. This is a comment. Gaza will eventually turn into a city of tents. So this was after October 7th. It has now happened. And now the rains are hitting those tents. And this is a picture of an Israeli soldier in front of a water treatment plant, proudly destroyed. So what happens when the rains come? They mix with the sewage, people get cholera, people die. But it's not a quote-unquote violent death. It's just a deliberate infliction of the conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of a group in whole or in part. Questions? Anything? No? We following? Okay. I know this is a lot, and I really appreciate you guys letting me share this. So that is why I felt it important. If we go to the next slide, I could have just put this up and said, the International Association of Genocide Scholars say it's a genocide, so it's a genocide. I could have said that, but I always believe, as a lawyer, present the evidence, make your case, and I hope I've made a case for you that there is sufficient intent. And I haven't gone directly into too much of the aspect of killing members of the group, because I think that overlaps with some of the justifications. So say, for example, have we ever had an argument with people and they've said, it's not a genocide, it's just, or it's not a genocide because it's self-defense. It's not a genocide, it's just self-defense. Or it's not a genocide because, have we heard, because the population is going up? Have we heard this? Well, the Gazan sorry. They started it. We were provoked. We had no choice. What did you expect us to do? You should have known we would act this way. Why would you attack us if you knew we were going to attack you disproportionately? And under international law, these are not excuses. Could I go to the next slide? People will say, it's not a genocide, it's a war crime. That's the part I add. And I would suggest to you that the fact that the IDF soldiers' official headshots now only show the backs of their heads and not their faces, that evinces some evidence, some knowledge of guilt, some self-knowledge, whether they admit it or not. So, yes?
Is there any idea as to whether or not there's going to be mass adoptions of Palestinian children out to other countries?
It's a tricky question because on the one hand, you would want these children to be safe, and clearly they can't be safe where they are. On the other hand, you're helping to facilitate the ethnic cleansing.
Right.
And that's why so many of these countries, you know, the line goes out from the Israeli government, well, nobody wants the Gazans, which of course we've heard that type of line before in history before. Well, if you care so much, why don't you take them? And so that's a difficult question. There is an awful, what do you call it, anagram, WCNSF. This is what the medical workers label a child, wounded child, WCNSF, no surviving family. So when a whole family is killed, which in Gaza, the way the houses are built, the whole family, you have generations. So you drop a bomb, you collapse a whole house, you kill an entire line of people. And then maybe there's one survivor, and that's the wounded child, no surviving family. So we have to think about our obligations. But yes, that's a good question.
Why were you saying that their argument is that the population is going up?
The argument is that, well, how could it be a genocide? It's the world's, they will say, they'll put it like this, like it's a joke. Well, we're the world's worst at committing genocide because the population's still going up. So how could we be committing genocide? If we weren't trying to bring the population down. And of course, just imagine the circumstance. Well, so long as you outbreed the people who are killing you, then therefore it's not a genocide. Or another example, it's not a genocide. So long as I kill only so many people, but you're still able to. And the other way that it makes you think of them as a race of people. These are not individual children being killed. Oh, you had a child killed, you can just have to give birth to another one. That type of thing. And there's so much racism in this world about people who have large families. Ooh, they breed like rabbits, like vermin or, things like that. And that is a big thing in play because another point to be made about this thing with the people and the responsibility of their government, we think, well, they elected Hamas, right? We've heard this in 2005. There was an election and they voted for Hamas. Well, first of all, Hamas didn't quite get a majority, they got a plurality, sure. But about 2/3 of the population of Gaza were not 18 in 2005. So, and of course, once Hamas took power, they did not allow any more elections. So in terms of the popular will or the popular support, the responsibility there is, it's something to think about in comparison. So getting back on this, though, I've been talking about war crimes, and I've been talking about international law. I haven't even asked you, well, what is international law? Where does it come from? So any ideas on where does international law come from? The basis. The end of World War II? Very good. So what happened at the end of World War II? What was created? The United Nations. The United Nations was created by signatories to a treaty. Treaty. So the number one sources of international law would be treaty obligations, which a treaty is an agreement between states, written agreement between states. And looping back around, what is a state? What is a state? So a state under international law, a state has defined borders, a population that is permanently living there. They're not like a temporary people. And they have the capacity to enter into agreements with other states and to be recognized as a state, which is a little circular. So say, for example, when people say, well, Palestine, how is that? It can't be a state because the borders aren't clear. But then if the borders of Palestine aren't clear, then the borders of Israel are also not clear because it's the shared border. And that's why recognition is so important when we talk about we need to recognize, the United States does not recognize the state of Palestine, but other countries might. And you have to reach a certain threshold, which isn't totally clear, but in any case, a treaty is an agreement between states. And if I get the next slide, the other sources are customary international law. Before that, customary international law, which is widespread state practice, the general principles of law, which is, any legal system will follow these principles like good faith, and judicial decisions and learned treaties. But focusing on the customary international law, what's very interesting under international law is that under customary international law, there's a concept called jus cogens. I'm not expecting you to know this, but these are the non-derogable peremptory norms. Okay, another complicated series of terms, but what that means is these are the obligations states have that they may not derogate. There are things that a state cannot do under any circumstance. They can make no excuse for doing these things. There's no provocation to do this. There is no excuse. There's no treaty obligation. They can't sign a treaty saying, actually, we're going to pull out of the genocide treaty and do genocide. And we have an agreement between two states. We both agree to do genocide, so it's fine. There's no way of doing that. And so the things that those are, and there's a few of them, but they're the most important things, are torture, aggressive war, so meaning starting a war of aggression, not of self-defense, racial apartheid, and, what do you think? Genocide. So even if we didn't have the Genocide Convention, we still have the bedrock basis of international law, which is to say you cannot do these things. Now, zooming in, what is a war crime? What is a war crime? Any ideas?
Something contrary to the norms.
Contrary to the norms of the laws of war. Right. So anytime people say it's war, it doesn't have rules, of course. It does have rules. And not every war is the same in terms of whether the belligerent parties are keeping to those rules. And those rules do apply on all sides to all parties. You cannot say, well, therefore, because you attacked me, all bets are off and I get to do whatever I want. So just as the IDF has obligations, Hamas has obligations, everyone has obligations in an armed conflict to not do certain things, such as to recruit child soldiers or to do torture. So what is the law of war based on? Next slide. There's two major principles, and they kind of overlap. Don't get too confused about dividing them. Proportionality and distinction. So when a military commander on the field is deciding to target something, he's got to think there's a concrete, direct military advantage to targeting this. And the object is a military target, not a civilian target. And I'm using the force necessary to repel the threat. So it isn't necessarily like, well, if they kill 10 of yours, you kill 10 of theirs, and that's it. That's not like one for one. But it gives you a sense of what is the defining principle here. And one of the things that gets a little difficult, perhaps, is that certain civilian objects, certain civilian targets, like, for example, a bridge over a river, it could be considered, quote unquote, dual use. So let's say every day civilians use that bridge, okay? But then one day the army is amassing on the other side of the bridge and they're going to use it. Well, that's a justification to destroy the bridge in that case. What other type? So actually, Next slide. So this gives you a sense of the disproportionality, even though this is not clearly, I wouldn't call this prima facie evidence, but it's important to keep in mind. This is from 2008 to 2023, the ratios of deaths for Israelis and Palestinians. And here's a quote from an Israeli human rights organization, B'Tselem. There was more than a decade ago, there was a public opinion survey. If you had to kill 1,000 Gazans to save one soldier, of course, we would support that. Next slide. Disproportionality. This ex-Israeli intelligence chief said 50 Palestinians must die for every October 7th victim. We are now up to more like 100 Palestinians per October 7th victim, if you think 1,100 versus 100,000. And Israel has dropped about 13 Hiroshimas in an area more densely populated and smaller than Hiroshima. So the argument there, of course, is that, well, we are targeting terrorist infrastructure because the terrorists build their infrastructure underneath this. This was all, even Netanyahu said, this was all rigged up to explode. So when our soldiers went in there, they triggered the explosion and the whole place went off. That's, if you want to believe that. That's what he claims, as well as there's another claim, which is that Gaza has so many underground tunnels, and the number that they give is actually more tunnels than there are in the New York subway system, which is sort of absurd. But the idea here is that, well, for example, well, what about food? You know, if you give the population food, the fighters might get the food, and the civilians might get the food. So why don't we block the food, right? Well, this is, of course, a collective punishment and is a war crime. And in case you don't believe my characterization of it, it's so important to hear their own words. Next slide. Because this is actually their doctrine. It's called the Dahia doctrine. Dahia means neighborhood, or refers to a neighborhood in Beirut in one of their previous wars. Next slide. And it comes from this general who said, we will apply disproportionate force on a village and cause great damage and destruction there. From our standpoint, these are not civilian villages, they are military bases. So he used the word disproportionate. I mean, you know, and it sounds like something else from history it reminded me of. Remember in Vietnam? In Vietnam, there was something called the Strategic Hamlet Initiative, right? Where we had to burn the village to save it. We have to force the people into areas that are safe. We have to concentrate them. And we have to destroy the village because the villages are the popular base of support for the fighters who are attacking us. Is that?
I.e. My leg.
Yes. And that leads to atrocities like the My Lai massacre. But, next slide. So how does that apply here? Again, this starts to get very grim, but take a look at this. Defense minister says Israel plans to concentrate all Gazas into a humanitarian transit camps. And as we can see, this is what the quote-unquote ceasefire is. It's not a ceasefire by any means. And you see this is called the yellow line. So as we can see, Gaza has lost about 60% of the territory. The IDF occupies this area. It's also where most of the farmland is. And they're being forced into this line. And what do you think happens if you try to cross the yellow line? So let's see the next slide. I'm sorry to report on this, but here's their Twitter account, the IDF. We identified 2 suspects and we eliminated them. Boys collecting firewood. Now, even if it was somehow clearly delineated, this line, which it isn't, that is not distinction. You can never target those kids, and they're clearly, obviously not terrorists. But that's where we're at these, at this current time, and it's tragic. Next slide. Okay. The imaginary yellow line. Next slide after that. And I want to draw something I've really noticed that I think is really interesting. On this side, we have the different people who reference the October 7th IDF soldiers who were taken, kidnapped from his tank. Kidnapped from his tank. Kidnapped from his tank. Does that sound a little strange to anybody? Why? 5 minutes? Okay. Because, well, who's a child in this case? A 22-year-old soldier is a child because he's kidnapped from his tank. Meanwhile, the deputy speaker of the Knesset says everyone's already a terrorist from birth in Gaza. So it's, in terms of the double standards, there are millions of them. That's a big one. So I'm going to have to cut a lot of this short. Let me skip directly. Can I skip to what's being done about it? Which would be slide 37, the ICJ, the plausible case of genocide. So let me speed up to what is being done. This is the special rapporteur, and she's, my hero. Nice Italian legal mind. And right now, in front of the International Court of Justice, the South Africans have brought a case against Israel saying that's genocide and presenting the evidence, which is tons and tons and tons of social media in a lot of cases of IDF soldiers proudly posting the war crimes that they're doing, like I showed you with the burning water treatment plant. And also the ICC has the sanctions under the International Criminal Court, which is a different set of, which is based on the Rome Treaty. I don't have time. But basically, the leaders of Israel, Yoav Gallant and Netanyahu, and some leaders of Hamas are charged as war criminals, and it is the obligation of states who are parties to that convention to arrest them. However, our country is not part of that convention, and we actually put sanctions on her and on the Chief Justice of the International Criminal Court for investigating Israel and in America. So that's where we're at. We call that, I believe, anarcho-tyranny, which is when you go after the people who are trying to solve or, protect the law. And next slide. And our leaders are complicit. We have the Track APAC. If you've ever been on Track APAC, it's a site. But Alex Padilla, that's the money he's taken. There he is. And there's Theodore Herzl. And here's Adam Schiff. Look at him. They're having a great time with Netanyahu. As well as something really important. The next slide. This was our Henry Stern. He went to an Israeli delegation recently. Julia Brownlee, she's taken the money. And we can push her. What we need to do is, there's this thing called the Block the Bombs Act. And the point I need to make about that is, okay, it's about stopping quote-unquote offensive weaponry to Israel. Can I have the next slide after that one? Stop there. Yeah, this one. And you have to really ban all the weapons, because think about it like this. There's no such thing as a defensive weapon, right? If you're a convicted felon, you're not allowed to own body armor, right? Have you heard this? Right. Because it enables you to attack. So if you give somebody defensive weapons while they're committing an attack, you are enabling that. As well as financial activity. So a supermajority of Democrats support the same sanctions on Israel that brought down apartheid in South Africa. And to draw a parallel from 1989, why are we singling South Africa out? There's 42 other states in Africa where they have worse human rights than South Africa. Why do we have to single them out? Similar, right? So that would be our obligation. That would be our obligation under international law, would be to withdraw our financial support and, of course, our military support. But what is our personal obligations, of course, is something to think about, and I hope we'll discuss. But let me speed through the next slide. Get on the flotilla. Have we heard the flotilla? So this is a Jewish American, and there have been people who've said, if Jews from around the world tested Israel's blockade by getting on boats and trying to cross it with humanitarian supplies with the baby formula and the anesthetic, dare Israel he was put in an Israeli dungeon and eventually let out. But could they keep doing that? And how bad does that look? Next slide. Have we heard of this IHRA definition of anti-Semitism? So this is a controversial definition of anti-Semitism that the Trump administration is using to crack down. And essentially, I want to draw you to two really important points, which is the person who drafted the definition has now disavowed it and says it's being weaponized. That's Kenneth Stern, who drafted the definition. And the key thing is that, one of the key things of the definition is that it is considered, according to this definition, inherently anti-Semitic to compare any aspect of Israeli government policy to the Nazis. You cannot ever make any type of comparison. It is literally impossible. Well, next slide. Here's what an IDF soldier said. I felt like a Nazi. It looked exactly like we were actually the Nazis and they were the Jews. So is he anti-Semitic, according to that definition? And that definition, according to a law signed by Governor Newsom, is going to be implemented in classrooms. So to chill the speech and to make it so that I couldn't give this presentation, I get in trouble. I get fired if I was a teacher. And I want to end on a note of hope. Can we show the Miss Rachel clip? So do we know Miss Rachel? This is Miss Rachel. You know Miss Rachel. You met her? No. Who's Miss Rachel? Can you tell us?
I get a mic for this? Sure. Cool. She's kind of like Coco Melon, but an actual person.
She's like Coco Melon, but a person. Very good. So she's one of the top. She is maybe the top entertainer. What's that? This one. And here she is with a little Gazan girl. Take a look.
Let's go back to sleep, Roja. We're so tired. See the bunny sleeping till it's nearly noon. Shall we wake them with a merry tune? They're so still. Are they ill? Wake up soon. Wake up, little bunnies! Skip, little bunny, skip, skip, skip. Skip, little bunny, skip, skip, skip. Skip, little bunny, skip, 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 and stop. Let's hop again. Hop, little bunnies, hop, hop, hop. Hop, little bunnies, hop, hop, hop. Hop, little bunnies, hop, hop, hop. Hop, 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 and stop.
So I did want to end on perhaps a note of resilience. And to remember, there is no statute of limitation on murder. And this little girl, thankfully, at least she's going to grow up and she's going to be an adult, and we're going to get to know her, people like her, for the rest of our lives. And I want to open it up to any questions, or if we want to go back and review anything. And I thank you so much. It's such an honor to put this in front of you. And I really, really feel very blessed and to be part of this community. And to show that I'm more than just a singer. No. Thank you.
So one piece of information that in regard to Julia Brownlee, I've met with Julia Brownlee throughout the years with representatives of J Street, and to talk about with her and influence her as far as voting in regard to sending some weapons to Israel. And she has gone to Israel with J Street. J Street does that. They take senators and also congresspeople. AIPAC does the same thing, to Israel and to meet with different people there. And she's very supportive of a two-state solution. Well, that'll never probably happen, but she is very supportive of that. As far as her taking AIPAC money, I don't know about that. I guess you've done the research and you saw that. I have a question of everybody here, though, something that I've thought of, and I would love to hear some different opinions because I'm not sure. And that is, when October 7th happened, what kind of response would you have liked to see? Now, and I'm totally opposed to the Israeli government, and when you talk about Israelis, and I mean, the government is a very right-wing government, majority. But what kind of response would you have felt okay with that Israel would have had to the October 7th massacre, basically? And I'd love to hear from quite a few different people, and we may have all different opinions.
I do have slides
that's
on
good.
this as well that I didn't get to.
I'd like to hear from people here, because I know that most people here are supportive of the Palestinians, and I'd be really curious to know if you think Israel should have responded at all, and if they did, what you think would have been appropriate from your perspective.
Thank you, Shoshana.
Could you put this slide?
When I first heard about October 7th, I wrote down my thought of when privileged people get hurt, there's going to be hell to pay. And I was, like not supportive, but I expected there would be a horrific response. And by November, we were out protesting that response because it felt like too much at that point. It felt like it was too much killing and disproportionate. That's my personal feeling. I know that it has been going on, and this ties into a lot of other pieces that it's also very uncomfortable or disconcerting that there's so much we all bring into this from our own generational traumas and such that at Chalice, I was hopeful for a little more interaction at that time to support each other. And we did have conversations in January, and that was helpful. But I appreciate a group like this to be able to talk together and bring our difficult questions and feelings out to each other and be able to talk about it. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I address that? As the legal perspective,
Go ahead.
well, Diana, or
Yeah, you sure? Okay, I'm gonna stand up for this if you guys don't mind.
Yeah.
I want to make it perfectly clear. I am not pro-Palestinian and anti-Israeli. I am anti the Netanyahu government and their actions against the Palestinian people. So I don't want anything that I'm saying to be perceived in any other way. And to answer your question specifically, I'd like to say that I believe that a well-funded, well-designed army, as sophisticated as the Israeli army is, supported by the United States military, is very capable of very exact, very precise actions. And we need to remember that Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. It was Hamas that created these atrocities. We had the ability to do a precision strike and an ongoing covert effort against Hamas, which would have been welcomed by the Palestinian population. So that's what I would have liked to have seen. An action, a reaction to this that not only would have gotten rid of the immediate threat, because there's an existential threat of Hamas through other governments that back them, but the immediate threat that Hamas posed to Israel, give the Israeli people the feeling that they got their just revenge, but would have also liberated the Palestinian people from this horrible regime that has taken over their country. And that could have been done. Instead, it was used as an excuse, in my opinion, to commit a homicide, a genocide, that they've been clearly articulating is their goal.
so yeah, and I wish I had another hour to give a presentation on this, but what I will say to you is, just as is in the case of any other genocide, there is a pretext. There is an inciting event. There's an event that is taken advantage of. And a lot is not very clear on October 7th. There has been no independent investigation of October 7th, meaning an international investigation. There's only been the Israeli government's investigation of October 7th. And what I will tell you as well is that on October 7th, let me ask you, how many people were killed on October 7th? Do we know? Around 100? Interesting. 1,200. 1,200, around 1,200, around 1,100. Okay. Of that percentage, how many were civilians? Do we know? Has that ever been a distinction that's ever been made when it comes to the Israelis? Which ones are civilians and which ones are military? Never. Like I said, kidnapped from a tank. They're children, even if they're in the IDF. Well, what happened on October 7th in terms of the targeting, the ratio of military to civilian targets on October 7th is a much better ratio